Okay, as far as I can see on my watch, it is 2 o'clock. So welcome to this Belbin webinar, where we will be looking at your Belbin reports to ensure that you are getting all that you can out of the report and to ensure that you're using it to help your self-development, your self-awareness, and to understand where to make that best contribution within a team. We're going to spend the first 5 or 10 minutes whizzing through the theory, just to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to the 9 team roles, their strengths and weaknesses, and what Belbin actually measures. We're then going to take some time and we are going to look page by page of the Belbin individual reports and really delve deep into what questions you should ask, what you should be hoping to get from that. My name is Jo Keeler. I am one of the managing partners here at Belbin, and I've been working at Belbin for 19 years. So hopefully I have fed back a fair few reports in my time, so we'll be able to give you as much as you possibly need. I also have Lisa Ward with me today, who is our customer and relationship manager. She's been with us for almost 5 years, I believe. Crikey, doesn't time fly when you're having fun? And Lisa will be there to field all of your questions. So what I would love is to make this as interactive as a webinar possibly could be. And if you have any questions at any time, to use the Q&A box, and Lisa will interrupt me as and when she can. I'll try not to get too much zoned into what I'm saying to give Lisa time to talk. If Lisa can answer your question easily, obviously she will do anyway. Right, so let's start. Let's start at the very, very beginning. And the first thing that I would love you to do is I would like to find out how many of you on this webinar today have actually got a copy of your Belbin individual report with you. So I'm just going to launch a poll here. So yes, you have it, but it's just based on your own perception, your self-perception inventory. Yes, you have it, and you have observers in there as well. No, because you're waiting to see how useful it could be first. You're going to wait until you take the plunge. Or no, because you can't find it. Perhaps you did it ages ago, it's not at hand, it's not saved where you thought it was. Okay, brilliant. Now that's interesting. Thank you very much for joining in there. I will share those results with you. So the majority of you have got your reports with your observer assessments. That's fabulous. One of you just SPI only, so hopefully we can convince you by the end of the day to get feedback from others. And no, waiting to see how useful first. Nobody said that. Wonderful. And there's 2 or 3 of you can't find it. Don't worry, I can't find a thing at the moment. I've got no idea where anything is, so that's fine. We'll let you off. Okay. So let me now just share my screen with you. And we're going to quickly go through those 9 team roles, a little bit of that theory, to make sure that we're all really on the same page. Okay, so we're going to start off with the classic, of course, what is a Belbin team role? What is it that we're measuring anyway? And a Belbin team role is a tendency to behave, contribute, and interrelate with others in a particular way. As we know, the research went on for over 9 years at Henley Business School and in Australia as well at a university over there, where they tried to work out what was it that made a team successful. And they found these 9 different behaviours. And the key word here is tendency. It's not an absolute. It's not a you all always behave this way. It's that you will tend to behave. And when we're talking about behaviour, what do we mean by behaviour here at Belbin? Well, your behaviour is influenced by many things. It's influenced by your personality, your mental abilities, your values and motivations, your experience. So your experience of different managers, different organisations, working styles, life experience comes into there. Also your external influences, and my goodness, what an external influence this current situation is. It's making us behave in slightly different ways than I think we do normally. And also, as you understand and learn more about Belbin, you understand how you can learn about each of these team roles, and again, that will affect your behaviour. So your behaviour can change, and one could argue that it should change because this is about your contribution to the workplace, and if your workplace needs you to behave in a certain way, then we perhaps need to adapt and be flexible enough to be able to do that. It's an interesting one, actually. I was speaking to one of our distributors in the US a few months ago, And he uses Belbin on a regular basis. Personally, he does it about every year or so. And I thought, that's interesting. Why do you do it so frequently? Because I personally do it every sort of 2 to 3 years. And he said, well, it's like a cholesterol test, Joe. He said the really interesting thing is that you go to the doctor, you have your cholesterol checked, and then the doctor gives you a score and then tells you what you need to go away and do. So you go away and you do the exercise, you eat healthily, Benacol or whatever it is, and then what you do is you go back to the doctor and say, but doctor, I'll take my cholesterol again. Has the result gone down? Has it changed? How am I seeing an effect from what I've been doing over the past year or so? And Belbin could be the same as this. You know your behaviour at the moment because it's a snapshot, but there may be things that you want to actually change. There may be things you want to learn. You maybe want to be a stronger example of a particular type of team role. And this is great. And I can measure this. We can go back to the doctor, you can go back to Belbin. You can repeat this to see whether or not anything that you have been doing has affected your behaviour. A really quick one here is the one, obviously, oh crikey, it was so quick. It was so quick that I forgot to let it go. There we are. Is what we're looking, again, is this behaviour. It's what people see and interact with in the workplace. It's not hidden behind this, beneath the surface. So it's very much a case of what I do as opposed to who I am, even though there was still an obvious link there. So a quick reminder of those 9 team roles. We have Implementer. Implementer is a wonderfully organised one with a fetish for Excel. They are practical, they're reliable, they do things that the company needs them to do. They're conservative with a small c, they don't like to challenge existing procedures and protocols. They are the ones really who have quite a strong sense of self, and they are able to be strong and just go through, get everything done in a very reliable and practical way. However, these allowable weaknesses, which we know all of these team roles have, the allowable weakness is allowed. I'm going to really stress that, because something's going to have to give. It's like the flip side of a coin. If you're going to be brilliant at something, something is going to have to give. And in this case, the implementer, you may be somewhat inflexible and slow to respond to new possibilities. Also a lack of creativity sometimes for the implementer. The next team role is one of those creative team roles. It's that of plants, and these are great problem solvers. They're great at coming up with solutions to difficult problems. Now, all of their ideas may not be brilliant. They may scatter their seeds of ideas everywhere, but they're not all going to be fabulous, but there will be gems in there. And these are the ideas which are coming sort of from left field. These are ones which are novel ideas, new ideas. However, because they're so busy up here, coming up with all the different ways to look at things, sometimes they're not great at communicating. They can find it difficult to get other people to understand where they are. And also they can ignore those incidentals, not great on the detail. We have this other creative team role as well, and that is of the resource investigator. So where the plant is sometimes quite introverted, quite happy to be by themselves to come up with ideas, the resource investigator is an enthusiastic extrovert. And they're outgoing, talking to people, finding opportunities, and they're going outside of the team to be able to bring the ideas back to the team so that they can be of use. They're searching under every stone to be able to find a little bit of treasure. Sometimes, however, they get bored, they lose enthusiasm. Yeah, they have an initial wave of, come on, let's do it, this is brilliant, and then they just go and do something else. So they need to keep constantly stimulated. We now come to the coordinator, and as with the icon here, the coordinator is best seen as really the conductor of the orchestra. They know what music is meant to sound like, they know what the overall effect is, and they bring in people as and when required. They get great at identifying talent and ensuring that that talent is brought in at the right time. They look at the big picture, they're very broad in outlook. They are able to clarify goals for everybody, get everybody back on track. Hang on a minute, this is what we're after, this is what we're doing. They're very calm, they don't flap, they're very laid back. And sometimes that can be to their detriment, because people are saying, hang on a minute, what are you actually doing whilst you've got your feet up on the desk drinking a cup of tea? Have you delegated everything? Of which a coordinator say that delegation is work itself, but can sometimes be seen to be the laid back of the team roles. So the coordinator is quite dominant alongside the shaper. Now the shaper is the energy, it's the thrust, it's the drive, it's the competitiveness, it's the challenging role that really does make sure that obstacles are overcome, ensure that the team doesn't lose anything and doesn't get complacent. However, shapers can also upset people, and that's because it's the task that's important, not the people involved. Now, shapers are quite resilient, and if they can bounce back with good humour, if they can ensure that everybody takes everything in the way in which it's meant, that is a fantastic example of a shaper, but they can sometimes upset people. Next, we have the monitor evaluator, and the monitor evaluator is the one who is able to take all of the emotion out of the decision-making process. They weigh up the pros and the cons, and they are able to work out the best way forward. They're not always seen as the most visible of team members because they like to sit back, they like to listen whilst everything's going on around, but they judge their intervention perfectly for when that decision needs to be made. So the decision making shouldn't always be the person who is perhaps managing the team, but the one who has the strongest monitor evaluator behaviour. Of course, they also have allowable weakness. Sometimes they can be seen as lacking drive, could be overly critical, always saying no. And again, this is absolutely fine. You can't necessarily drive and inspire other people at the same time as being quite critical in your decision making. But make sure you listen to monitor evaluators, don't let that put you off. Next, we have the team workers, and the team workers are the gel that keep the team together. These are the ones that listen, have massive empathy. They are ensuring that everybody is making the contribution that they can make. They don't feel, so people don't feel squeezed out. They're wonderful with problem members of the team as well. They avert friction beautifully. However, they can be a little bit indecisive. They can not want to make a decision because they don't want to upset anybody. But again, this is fine because it's allowed, it's the allowable weakness. Completed finishes. Now, what they found when they did a lot of the research at Henley is sometimes the most amazing teams were doing brilliantly and looked like they would win, but they would actually fall at the final hurdle. And this is because they didn't have the completed finisher behaviour at their fingertips. And completed finishers, or as we like to call them, completed polishers, because actually they never quite finish because nothing's ever quite good enough. They're the ones with the attention to detail. They have this inner anxiety that means that they're always checking and checking again. Allowable weaknesses, well, they're reluctant to delegate. Why are they reluctant to delegate? Because nobody's going to do as good a job as them. They'll do it because only they can trust themselves for their high standards. That's fine, just needs to be managed well, especially whilst we're working from home, when there isn't anybody physically to take something off them. So right now, please keep an eye out for that completer finisher behaviour. And last but not least, we have specialist, and the specialist is the one who has a thirst for knowledge, a love of learning. The specialist team role is one who has professional high standards and wants to know a lot about a depth of information. However, they may only contribute on that quite narrow front, and the coordinator really needs to be the one who brings that information to the fore for the good of the team. They can also dwell on, that depth, those intricacies. So again, that's fine because you need that information, but maybe make sure that the specialist knows when to contribute. So there we have it, probably the speediest 9 team roles ever that we have gone through there. Each has their strengths, each have their weaknesses. Each is as important, they're all equally important and all equally needed in a team. And of course, what we know is what makes an effective team is that we have those 9 team roles. People know and understand themselves, their own contributions, and others as well, what contributions they can make. And that the team contains relationships that are able to exploit these strengths and weaknesses. Why is it important? Well, because teamwork's ever so difficult, and we shouldn't just say, right, there you go, you're working as a team now. There you go, there's a project, we expect it to be delivered within 6 months. That's not enough, you need to be able to work at this. So before we go on to the reports here, one thing I would just like to stress is the importance of observer feedback. It looked like most of you had observer feedback, but those who haven't, we can be in an echo chamber. If we only find out how we think we are behaving in the workplace, then it's sort of a self-fulfilling sort of circle, isn't it? Oh, I'm brilliant at this. Oh, yes, you are, aren't you? Yes, you are. What you need in there is, because this is behaviour that people interact with, they see, you need to get feedback from other people. Are they seeing the same strengths that you see in yourself? Are they seeing the same weaknesses? What is it that the people that you work with trust and value? What is it that they come to recognise as your most positive contribution when they work with you? What are they looking for you to bring to the party? And of course, we won't know any of that unless we ask people, and that's why we ask for these observer assessments, which is a page of words that relate to the team roles, and people just have to give it 1 or 2 ticks to each of these words, or no ticks at all, if they see that particular characteristic in you more than they would see in the normal person. Now, what we have to remember here is, who do we ask to act as our observers? They do need to be people you've worked with, so it has to be a work context. This is a work tool, so please don't ask your parents, your brothers, your sisters, your husbands, your wives, because they see perhaps a different side of you than other people do. So, for example, when I ask my mum to feedback on me, I come up as quite a high specialist, and I think, why is that? And I realise it's because I can use a computer. So we need to make sure we keep the context as work, and it needs to be people that we work closely with. We say 3 to 6 months, because if you've only just started working with somebody, what we find is we keep our best suit on for a while. We're on our best behaviour. We're trying to be the perfect employee, the perfect work colleague, and it's only after 3 to 6 months that this begins to slip and we see the real you. So ensure that you know people for at least, or worked with them for at least 3 to 6 months. I would also add something else there. I would add that you want somebody to know why they're doing it, because you want people to be really honest. So give people the context of why. You don't want it to be a tick sheet of everybody just saying, yeah, you're brilliant. And you want to have feedback from people you trust, because if you get feedback from people you don't trust, how much are you going to listen to what they've said, or how are you going to discard it if it doesn't agree with you? So it's important that we choose these observers correctly. It's important that we give it some thought. And also contextual. Do you want it with your current team, or do you want it with a team you've previously worked with? Do you want to get a whole mixture of managers, your colleagues, and people who work for you? Or at the moment, do you just want to see how your colleagues see you? So give it some thought, because each will give you a different perspective. So, as an individual, let's go on to these individual thoughts. Why on earth would you bother? Well, we've been for a little bit of the reasons. I mean, but obviously this is going to help your self-development, your learning, your self-awareness, help you to learn where and when timing is key to make your best contribution. Understand how others see you. My goodness, this is all about a growth mindset, isn't it? It's saying that actually how I am now isn't necessarily who I'm going to be in 5 years. Let's grow and see how I can develop my strengths. And also learn how to be a strong example. So strengthen those strengths and manage your weaknesses. Don't just settle for being a high-ish plant. See if you can get into over the 80th percentile, but we'll talk about that in a second. Right, so that's a bit of background. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen here for a second, because what I would love to find out is what we have here in the webinar. So when I say what we have, that wasn't very well put. What is the team role distribution in this particular webinar? So if you know, I'd love you to click watch those team roles you have in your top 2 or 3 in your profile. And I'm talking your overall profile. So if you've got observers, include that. If you haven't got observers, it will just be on yourself. If you haven't done Belbin, have a guess. It's a bit hazardous having a guess, because there's a lot more to it, but go for it. And if you've only got 2 really strong team roles, just put 2 down. If you've got 3, put all of those down. I'm going to launch this now. So I shall give you a few seconds to tick or put a check mark, or whatever you call it, into your top 2 or 3 team roles. We did this yesterday, actually. We had a webinar yesterday where we were going through all of the research, all the work we did at Henley, and it was quite interesting, the team roles that were most prevalent. And I'm not going to give the game away just yet, but let's see if it's similar. Okay. I'm going to end it there. That's fine. So there's out of those of you, I'm going to share the results here. So we're sharing this. So we have implemented, we have 5. I'm just going to put this here. Implemented 5. I'm going to move this forward a bit. Right. Okay. And we have plant, we have 2. And we have 6 for resource investigator. We have 6 again for coordinator. We have shaper, we have 3. Okay, and monitor evaluator 1. Okay, team worker, you're out in front there, you have 8 for team worker. Completer finisher, only 2. And we have specialists, which we have 5. So interesting. As you can see here, what does this mean we have with us on this particular webinar? Well, it means that we have the social roles, as you can see. Surprise, surprise. People who are social, who want to interact with others, even on a webinar, are here. People want to find out a bit about themselves. Plants, knowledge about, so less of the thinking roles apart from the specialist, and I think that's that love of learning, that thirst for knowledge, that wanting to know all they can about Belbin. We have some implementers, that's great. Completer finishers, keep an eye on them. They probably don't feel that they can because they've got too much that they need to finish. And the shapers are just cracking on because they've got stuff to do. So thank you for doing that. I always think it's a bit of fun to see who we've got in the audience. Lisa, do we have any questions so far before I go on to the reports?
No, we're all good at the moment. I've answered the ones that have come through, so we're all good. You carry on.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So let's go back. Get your reports out ready. We're going to go back now to here. So you've filled in your self-perception inventory. You've got your observer feedback. Your report is in front of you and you're thinking, what on earth do I do now? What's really important to understand with these Belbin individual reports is each page tells a different part of the story. It looks at you from a slightly different perspective. So to use a page by itself is only going to give you a limited amount of information. So we start here with the team role overview. This is page 1. This is all of the available information all put together. And it's going to give you an idea of how you feel about each of those team roles. Obviously, if you have observers, it will include the observers there. Remember, you need a minimum of 4 observer assessments for this updated report. We don't provide it on fewer than 4 due to the fact that we feel it could be slightly biased, and we don't want that. We want it to be a fair reflection. As you see here, we're looking at percentiles. And what is a percentile? Well, there's all well and good saying that you score a certain amount for each team role, but does that matter? Unless you compare that with the general population. If everybody else scores the same as you, it's in no great shakes. So we need to know how you compare against a norm database. So hence we put everything as a percentile. So as we can see here with Sam, Sam is virtually at the 90th percentile for implementer, and that means that only 10% of the population scores higher than Sam for that particular team role. Similarly, if you look at plant, you can see that Sam, let's say that's the 5th percentile for plant. That means that 95% of the population scores higher than Sam for that. What is this population database that we use? Well, we look at this on a regular basis. We are currently using a database of 9,500. This is an international database, but it is mainly English speaking. There are equal-ish male to female. I think it's 51 to 49%. What we do is that we do look at this on a regular basis, and when we feel that there is statistical significant change, we will change that norm database because the world changes, and we want to ensure that you're being measured not on people who perhaps attended a training course in Henley in 1968, but actually the current database, at least in this millennia, would be great, which it is, and we check this on a regular basis. Any questions, Lisa, on that particular page before I go off to the next one?
No, we're all good here. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you. So the next page is really one that people can get hung up on. And this is because you're really now including how other people see you. And this is where it gets really fascinating. So that top line there is looking at how Sam sees themselves in order of preference from top number 1 to bottom number 9. So Sam order, his ranked order here is implementer, monitor, evaluator, specialist, coordinator, completer, finisher, shaper, team worker, resource investigator, and plant. Then we have the feedback from the people that Sam has decided to ask us to observe them. And you can see here that the top one here is that Chris has observed monitor, evaluator, specialist, implementer, team worker, so on and so forth. You can read those out. So what does this mean? Well, first and foremost, it is only giving you a ranked order. So remember, it's not saying how much of that team role that that person is seeing you, but only the order in which they're seeing the team roles. Why is this important? Well, actually, you could get hung up on a position and say, well, actually, somebody else has seen that team role on third, whereas somebody else has seen it as fourth. And it could just be that there's 1 or 2 percentile difference there. So we don't want to get too hung up. But what we can see here is patterns. We can, if you use a bit of paper and just cover them all up apart from the top 3, so columns 1, 2 and 3, you can start to see if there's any patterns emerging. Then extend it out to number 4 as well. See where the similarities are. But what do you need to ask yourself at this point? One of the key things I would say is question who you ask to observe you. What is their relationship with you? Are you their manager, or do they manage you? When did they work with you? How long have they worked with you? So ask these questions and you will suddenly think, oh, now that makes sense. I'll give you an example here is Nigel Belbin. When he observes me, he sees my team worker far higher than anybody else in the office. And that is because he's a partner, and we have a relationship where I listen quite a lot. But no, we have a relationship very, very much, that's quite a social relationship in some ways, whereas the rest of the office, team worker for me is quite low, and that's because I'm constantly telling them what needs to be done and the fact that it needs to be done now. So I am far more shaper with the rest of the office because that is my relationship with them, whereas with Nigel I am far more team worker. And you can see that being picked up here on this particular page. You can see and understand the relationships. One other question to ask is, what do you think the main team roles, strengths of the people who have observed you are? So if somebody is a really high plant, for example, are they going to see and value your plant behaviour as much? Or are they going to see and value other behaviour that they don't have more often? So there's lots of questions to ask here. Then what we have is that last line, the observer overall views, looks at all of the observers and it combines a very complicated formula, an overall line. And then we look at the overall line for the observers. We look at your line as well at the top there for how you saw yourself, and we come up with an overall team role composition. Now at this point, people normally ask, what is the, how much does each observer impact on the bottom line? Lisa, is that what you were about to say, or do you have a different question?
No, I have a different question. It
came
just at the end of the last page, just as I said no, it popped up. So, and I think this, I've left this for you to answer, Joe, live, because I think it's really relevant and lots of people probably be asking it. So if the height of all the bar graphs are the same, so it's what we'd probably call quite a flat profile.
Yes.
How should this person interpret that? Should this person feel that he or she is an all-rounder?
Do you know, that's a really good one. In fact, I've got on my notes here, remember to mention what happens if it's flat, so I can't believe that I didn't. I do apologise. Let's go back to that page so we can look at it. Or no, it's not letting me, never mind. If you have a flat profile and it is based just on your self-perception inventory, so just on how you see yourself, what that means is you have sort of hedged your bets a bit. You haven't made a real declaration as where your strengths are. If you're looking at the scores that you would have put in your self-perception inventory, you'd have used 1s, 2s and 3s. You'd have spread them quite evenly. Now, does that mean that somebody's an all-rounder? It could do. It could also mean that they don't really know what their contribution is. It could also mean that they don't want anybody to know because they're not sure why they've been asked to do it. So there could be a political reason behind that. So first of all, start, what was it like with just the self-perception inventory? And of course, when you fill this in and get observed, you are always sent your report with just the self-perception inventory in it first. If it's still flat with observers, that could mean many things. If it's still flat and you've included feedback from other people, that could also mean that people are seeing different strengths. And so they're not all agreeing on 1 or 2 or 3 particular strengths. People are seeing different aspects of you. And it could be that you are having to play different roles. It could be that you've chosen your observers from a disparate group, so it could be from different teams. There can be lots of reasons why there may be disagreement amongst your observers, but if there is disagreement, there does also tend to be that flat profile. Has that answered the question? Lisa, I will let you get back to me on that and I can elaborate further if need be. But what I will do in the meantime is just say that the influence each observer has on the overall, because it's something that people are usually quite interested in. So if you say that the self-perception is equal to 1, each observer is equal to 1/3. So if you had 3 observers, you'd have 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3 would equal 1. So the combined weighting of 3 observers together would be equal to the self-perception weighting when they were put together to give your overall team role composition. Now, obviously, we can't produce a report with 3. So when you have a report with 4 observers, the observers are slightly outweighing the effects of the self-perception inventory by 1/3. If you have 6 observers, what we have there is 1/3 times 6, which is 2. And so the observers are twice as influential as the self-perception inventory. What happens if you have more observers? We'll actually keep that 2-to-1 ratio, but the effect of each individual observer just goes down. We can send you some information that will explain that in better detail if required. Okay, can I go forward, or Lisa, do we have anything else?
No, we're all good. You carry on.
All good, thank you very much. So the first page is analysis of your team or composition will tell you the ranking of each of the team roles. What we need to therefore do is then look at this next page, which is comparing self and observer perceptions. And this page is showing the combined observers compared to the self-perception inventory. And what you're looking at here is to see where the differences and where the similarities are. So one thing I will say here is you very rarely get exact. I don't think even, and we have pretty coherent profiles here in the Belbin office, and even we don't have it exact. There is always some variance because we have different relationships with people, and again, their team roles also come into play a little as well. But what questions do you need to ask? Well, you need to ask yourself, or if you're feeding this back to somebody else, why do you think they see something different to you? Why do you think, Sam, that others don't quite see as high influence as you? And did you know, Sam, that you had a hidden strength? Is in fact your teamwork is something that people that you've asked to observe you really value and really expect you to bring to the team. Can you think of why that may be? So what we're doing here is not saying, no, actually you're wrong, they see something else. It's what you're saying is, my goodness, people are seeing strengths in you that you never had, you never realised you had, if there's a big difference. And just lots of open questions to ask is, why do you think they're seeing you slightly differently? Why do you think they see your strengths in a different way? Ask the questions, when did you last make that contribution? How well do you think that contribution was accepted by everybody else? With Belbin, generally, this isn't a case of getting your ruler out and looking at the millimetres. It is a case of really getting a feel for what that graph is telling you. But if you did want to look at that, we do have those numbers at the bottom in the key. And this is something, again, if you were looking at using this as a self-development tool, it's something you can go back to. Is, you know, back in 2012, actually my observers collectively only saw this amount of implementer in me. But I've been working on that recently because I know that it was really needed, and so has that increased. So this is where, you know, a bit of your cholesterol check comes in. So this is fascinating stuff because this is really finding out how other people see you, and it is asking yourselves those open questions: the who, the why, the whens, etc. We now come off looking at your observers. So you will have this if you've just got your self-perception inventory. And this page is just looking at you, where you think your preferred roles are, where you think your manageable roles are, and your least preferred roles. As we were saying before, if you have a flat profile, you'll find most crosses in that manageable role part of the report. Very few people can do, in fact, I don't know if anybody can play all 19 roles brilliantly. So what we want to do is really identify those ones with the help of others to find which ones we can develop. What we also have here is the drop points percentile. Now, what is a drop points? You may or may not have this printed on your report, depending on the settings that were in the background when the report was produced. Your drop points percentile really is an indication as to how you completed the self-perception inventory. So when you completed the self-perception inventory, there was a statement which you could award points to, which didn't have any bearing on any of the 19 roles. It's what we call a drop points question. These questions pertain not to how you think you contribute to the team or to the work, but more about you. It's more about things like, well, whether or not you undervalue the importance of your own contributions. They're more about you as a person as opposed to your contribution to the team. And sometimes we find that this drop points score can go out quite high, and if it's over 80, this is where you need to ask a few questions, because what that is saying is that somebody isn't sure about their contribution to the team. They're not sure about the impact that they are having. If they're not, you know, have they been new to the team and they're not sure yet where they can make most impact? This is a difficult one. When I, many years ago, 19 years ago, joined Belbin, for my interview, I obviously completed the self-perception inventory, and I had a really low drop point score. I then retook my Belbin about a month after I joined Belbin, and my drop point score was through the roof. And it was because I'd gone from working from a large pharmaceutical company, where I was probably employee number 102,000, where I'd gone to employee number 3. And as you can imagine, there was a bit of a culture shock there. I had no idea of the role that I was meant to be playing. So that could be one of the reasons. And what we want to do here is just probe a little bit further, is to understand why their drop point score is so high. Again, we've got another page that we can send you that will give you a lot more detail on this. So it's just a little indicator to yourself, or if you're feeding these back to other people, is how well does that person know themselves, basically. How well do they know the contribution they're making within a team? The next page is the go and have a cup of tea and have a good read page, because this isn't something that you're necessarily going to want people to read if you are feeding back, I don't know, on a training course or as part of a workshop, for example. This is the so what page, and this page started many years ago, 30 years ago, with Nigel Belbin and Meredith Belbin and some of the team who were involved in the Henley work. And they, Nigel would say, right, so if you had these two as your top team role and this is your bottom team role, what advice would you give them? You know, from all of your experience, what would you like to tell them? And they pressed sort of play and record on the tape player at the same time, and so these reports began. We're now on our 7th version. We've changed some of the language so it's more accessible. But basically, this report is based on your top 3 team roles and your bottom team role. Now, if your top team role is head and shoulders above anything else, it will actually just be on your top 2 team roles and your bottom team roles. Team role, singular, obviously. So this is really looking at each end of the spectrum. And it's going to give you advice on how to project yourself, how to manage, how to be managed, and also where you should go and find somebody who has strengths when you really do not, how to be more effective. Have a good read of this. There's some wonderful advice in here. The next page we have called Maximising Your Potential. This is looking at what we would call trigger points. So it's saying very much if you're over a certain percentile for this team role, over a certain percentile for that team role, and below a certain percentile for another team role, it's going to generate these particular trigger points. And this is what makes the Belbin report so unique. It's not saying that you could have the same team role profile as somebody else, but you will have different things written in your report. Because it's looking at not just your top roles, it's looking at how much of those top roles. This report is really unique to yourself. What's really interesting is we're trialing our latest version of interplace reports at the moment, which who knows when it'll be out now because of all of the disruption we've had. But there's 3 of us in the office who have the same top 3 team roles. And I was concerned about the level of difference and if you know, it really was picking that up. And so I just showed this page, or equivalent to Nigel Belbin. I tip-X'd our names out and I said, right, who's who? And we had different trigger points coming out here. So these are, and so Nigel was able to say, well, actually, that's you, that's somebody else. Correct. Because we all had slightly different nuances, slightly different amounts of other team roles also coming in there. So you have your strengths and you have your weaknesses. What you will find is that there will never be more weaknesses than strengths because we want people to obviously have a positive experience with this particular page. If you're looking at projecting yourselves, if you're looking at interviews and things like that, these are great things to be able to talk about when people say, what are your strengths and your weaknesses? I mean, obviously you need to build them into a paragraph or 2 when you're explaining them, but these really can be used so that people understand how best to use your contributions. Now, it could be that you don't agree with your observers. It could be that you don't think that they see some of your team role contributions as much as they should. And in that case, what we've got here under the understanding your contribution based on your self-perception part of this page is that we do have advice on how to play that particular team role how to strengthen the way that you play that role so other people can see it. Again, there's lots of different sentences that come out depending on where you allocated your marks for that particular team role within the self-perception. So again, there's a lot of difference there. But this is great for coaching one-to-one. Okay, people aren't seeing what you want them to see. What can you do about it? Okay, let's go through this. How can you play your influential role with great better effect? Are we okay, Lisa?
There we go, just unmute myself. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I've just answered somebody who's just saying, are the reports produced automatically or do they, are they all analysed? But thankfully gone are the days where we're all sitting at a typewriter.
I know, but that's how it started. That's just what I love about Belbin. Is that's how it started 30 years ago. Was Nigel and Meredith, and it would be Nigel, just his son. Sorry, anybody who doesn't know who Nigel Belbin is, it's Meredith Belbin's son. Would be sitting up to all hours trying to write these reports, and then they thought, God, surely there's something around that can make this easier for us. They really were working to all hours trying to get these reports generated because people found them so useful. Thank goodness for computers, we say. Huzzah. Right, next page. Now this is very much an interesting one. It's one that is for your manager, really. It's one that I would use to sit down with my manager if I was looking at a coaching session or some feedback, not necessarily an appraisal, but when you should be having your regular one-to-one catch-ups with people. It's really going to give an indication as to what work and what working environment you are best placed. Now, again, another story that I heard from one of our distributors, because we have an amazing network of distributors worldwide, is they were working with an organisation and they said, these are all really interesting, but how do we use them You know, how do we make sure they don't just go back into that top drawer? And so they decided to each make 2 copies of their reports, and they gave one to their line manager, which they had monthly one-to-one catch-ups. And they used their report, and particularly this page, so that they could check that they were being given work that matched their strengths. And they use this really as a way of starting and continuing that conversation is, you know, how well are you doing at the moment? Well, actually, I'm finding that you're giving me work that isn't, really isn't, can't think of the word now. Isn't it awful when that happens? But it basically isn't playing to my strength. That's easy, isn't it? And so they use this to be able to say, well, okay, then what work would you, what sort of environment would you best be suited for? Let's try and find that kind of work for you. Okay, now we're going to come to 2 pages, which I always like to use together. So I'm going to put them both up. These 2 pages are just looking at your observers. And it's just looking at which words were ticked and how many times, which is on the right-hand side there. And then whether or not they were picking up on the strengths of each team role, or the allowable weaknesses, or both, and how much of each were they picking up on. What we have to remember here on the observer team role strengths and weaknesses is each bar is a bar in its own right. So what it's trying to do is to give you a proportion of the weaknesses people are seeing compared to the strengths that people are seeing for each particular team role. Here, I would say this is an absolutely healthy graph. You would expect people to see weaknesses. In fact, one could argue that if you have nothing on your associated weakness area of this page, you need to be a little bit worried because people either aren't seeing them or you're hiding them. Everybody has these weaknesses. We've worked with companies that have said, can we not allow people to tick list B? When you have your observer assessments, you have list A, which are all the words that are related to the strengths of the particular team role, and you have a list B of words which are related to the allowable weaknesses. And those list B words you can see on that page, list of observer responses, are all in italics. So you can identify which are list A and list B words. And some companies have asked us, we are not ticking any list B. We do not want any negatives, which is a real shame because sometimes when we manage and manipulate our negatives too much, sometimes we lose the corresponding strength as well. Now, this is quite a simple one. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second because I wanted to show you one which is a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to share a screen here. And this is something I know very well. And I've changed, it's not JBlogs, I've changed that. So I really want you to see this. This is one where perhaps their plant is coming out due to those allowable weaknesses. And that's why it's on their profile. Less the corresponding strengths are being completely here outweighed by those weaknesses. And that means that their strength, if they have them in plant, isn't being allowed to shine. Again, here we have Resource Investigator. This is okay. It's not quite overbalancing, but what we need to just be aware that it doesn't get any higher. So this is what I mean when it's really important to be able to look at every page because it tells a different part of the story. So if I move back here, as you can see my mouse scrolling away, let's just go here. So plant is coming out, let's look at that top, is coming out at 4. So it's still looking, it's over the 50th percentile, it's almost hitting the 60th percentile. And you might just say, well, that's great because you can make a real strong plant contribution. Well, let's just check if they're seeing the strengths and the weaknesses. So here, yes, it is quite high, but what we perhaps need to ask some questions here is, do we need to put something in place so that those weaknesses can be managed slightly? Because at the moment, it's not being useful. And on here, you can see those words. You've got the eccentric, the absent-minded coming through. Over talkative, that would be the resource investigator. So you can see how they're coming through. Just stop share that and just go back now to the slideshow. So these pages can be really interesting, and it's so important that you look through each one and ask questions. Now, when we look at the list of observer responses, as we know, if you cannot tell which words your observers have ticked, but what you can work out is if you had 4 observers here, as Sam does, if for diplomatic, Sam had 8, we would know that everybody had given that a double tick, and therefore that means that the anonymity of the observers has been slightly compromised. But that is the only way that would happen. Well, obviously, if it was 7, you'd know that everybody had at least given it 1 tick. In fact, everybody had given it a double apart from 1. So we need just to be a little bit careful there. One would argue, obviously, that if everybody's given it a double tick, it's quite obvious that you do show that. Again, it's these words that really bring the team role report you've got here to life, because you may have somebody who's a really high shaper, who is a really high monitor evaluator, who has teamwork really at the bottom of their profile, but they could have caring or helpful at the top of this list. And my God, that's telling me quite a lot that may not be coming out in terms of the team roles, because they haven't got any of those other attributes of team worker. But to know that you're dealing with somebody who's a helpful shaper monitor evaluator, now that is useful information to have. And again, that's what makes these Belbin reports so unique. These, by the way, these words are ones that you, if you are looking to project yourselves perhaps at interviewing, it could be internal or external. These words are ones that I would suggest using, along with the strengths and weaknesses on those other pages, because these are different to the norm of I am a great team player and I communicate well. These are ones that are really showing you. This is what other people are saying about you. This isn't you bigging yourself up. These are the people that you're working with, identifying and telling you where your strengths lie. This is also the page where you can again go back to your cholesterol check. Perhaps you were quite a high coordinator, but you wanted one of those words, conscious of priorities, to go up high. You wanted people to really see that as an area of coordinating you wanted to work on. Again, you can see whether it's rising up the ranks there. Next page, last page. Here we have the suggested work styles, and what this is doing, it is looking at your top 4 team roles, and it's looking at a combination, because we're not just one. I think going through the report, it really does emphasise, doesn't it, the point that we're not a plant, a resource investigator. We are a wonderful mix of all of these 9 team roles. And this is looking at your top 4, and it is putting the first 2 together, then the first and third together, the first and fourth, and the second and the third team roles together, and saying in combination, what kind of work would you best be suited towards? And again, I think this is a great one to sit down with a manager. Also sit down, if you've all got this page, if everybody within the team, because that's the idea, isn't it? If everybody in the team has got this page, when you have got a project in front of you, and you know your objectives, you know your timescales, and all of that has been worked out, and you're saying, right now, work needs to be done. Who is best at each stage here? These are great pages to all have in front of you, because Sam needs to be included in the planning. Not only are they going to make sure that everything is very organised and systematic, they're also going to make sure that the right decision is there. But you don't perhaps want Sam to be at the idea stage, because I can't see any resource investigator plant there. So who else has got that on that sheet of paper around them in the team? So this is a great practical one to use to ensure that work is being allocated to the right person. So we've come to the end there of a real step-by-step, what is each report trying to tell you? One question that does come up quite a lot is, how does this change for different cultures, looking at a worldwide distribution? And what we can say is, because we have distributors worldwide in over 20, maybe even 30 countries now, we have looked and examined all of the databases that they have, and we've given them to statisticians who said, right, where are the differences? And in fact, the statisticians came back and said there is more variance actually within a country than between two separate countries. And you can understand that because you would expect there to be more difference in the team role distribution, say, of an oil company to that of the NHS. They are two very different, culturally different organisations, and the difference between them is vast. And in fact, therefore, the difference between perhaps the UK and Norway is not so vast. So we looked at them and said there isn't actually that much difference between them. So that's why we have our norm base is actually a multicultural norm. What we are going to be doing is changing that for the next version, where people can choose their own norm bases depending on country. Although it won't give that much of a difference, I think it's important if there is a slight nuance that people are able to compare like for like. So that's something we'll be adding in whenever that may be, because I think the timeline in our Gantt chart's slightly gone out the window at the moment. Okay, any questions at all? Lisa?
No, I think everybody's fairly content. We've got no, oh, one's just come in. I'll take that.
Thank you.
Janet, I seem to be missing a page from my report, feedback and development suggestions. I did my evaluation February 2019. No, that should be there, Janet. So maybe perhaps it didn't get printed out. Yes, it should be there.
No, I think what happens, it depends who generated your report for you. Some people prefer pages, some papers other than others. So just go back to the person and ask them just to put that page back in for you. Absolutely. What I would love to do is, for those of you, there were very few, but for those of you who haven't yet taken the plunge to find out your Belbin team roles and to get one of these reports for yourself, we will follow up and we'll give you a bit of a discount code to really encourage you to do so. For those of you who haven't got feedback from others, I think now you'll be able just to see the depth and the amount of information that you can get from adding how other people see you. And this is really where the difference is with other tests as well. Because we're measuring your behaviour, the way that you do things, not who you are, but what I do. And therefore we invite to get that feedback from others. This Belbin and these reports can add as a great next step after perhaps you've looked at some other personality tools. So thank you very much indeed for joining us for the past 56 minutes. We didn't overrun the hour, which of course I am, yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good thing from the High Shaper to be able to not overrun. So thank you. If you've got any questions, please do get in contact with us, team@belbin.com, and we will obviously be following up with a recording as well of today. So thank you very much. Please keep safe and hopefully see you again soon. Goodbye.